Okay.
What are you
So
doing?
we're here. I just forgot to do that first. I was like, wait, where are we? We're here. We are here. Sorry, you guys. We took a week off, and I just completely.
You've been working too hard. You've been working too hard.
I'm new here. I have been working too hard, Kristen. That is exactly what I've been doing. It's too much of that New York sunshine just cooking my brain this week. Anyways, welcome to CASAA Live, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see all of you out in chat. Mallory, Neff, Skip, welcome. Chrissy, Adrian, Bill, Philip, happy to have you here. Mark Sliss in the house. Welcome, everybody. Philip Kirschberg, I see you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to CASAA Live. It is Saturday. We are here to do all the things and stuff. And we have a special guest today. Yeah, things and stuff, Chris. Not just the things, not just the stuff, things and stuff. We have a special guest with us today. We have Clive Bates joining us very soon. Alex has some legislation for us at the end of the hour, updates and things. What do we got going on at the end here, Alex?
At the end of the hour, we will talk about some updates for Colorado, HB 1064, Connecticut, SB 367, Alaska's SB 45, and Hawaii's HB 1570.
Ooh, exciting stuff. Really exciting. To save the juiciest bits right for the end.
Yeah.
But I guess really super quick, we'll do some hey, how are yous. I'm tired. That's my hey, how are ya? I'm just going to get mine right out of the way. Kristen, hey, how are ya?
Good. Survived this last week. Had a sick kid, but she's doing better now. And
always rough.
Yeah, weather's been really great. It's been sunny and it's getting warmer. And I actually turned the heat off in the house. So that's always a nice point of the year to the spring finally hit in May.
The worst is that awkward time where one day it's warm, then one day it's cold, and you're heat is on and then off and then on and off.
It's so annoying.
Just ready to turn it off.
I just turn it off and then get a sweater,
Yeah. You're cold, bundle up.
Exactly. But yeah, other than that, tomorrow's Mother's Day. So
yes, happy early Mother's Day to you and to all the mothers in chat here as well. Happy early Mother's Day to everyone. Unfortunately, we're not live on Sundays, so we can't wish you a happy Mother's Day live.
To whoever's watching tomorrow.
Yes. To all the replay crew moms out there. Happy Mother's Day to you. Alex, hey, how are you?
Doing good. Just a note, the reason why we bailed last weekend and rescheduled Clive for this weekend was my wife and I had to go spend some time with some friends down in the Catskills. So that was fun and spring-like. And I after more than a year, I have a NASCAR update for those who are interested. I swear to God, I'll keep this quick because I know I'm the only one who cares. But this weekend, deeply. This weekend is the race at Darlington, which is a throwback race, and so teams will use old paint schemes on the new cars to pay homage to the greats of the sport. And this year, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna share my screen because you're not gonna see it on national television. Let's see, Chrome tab, and this one here. So national. This won't make the news or won't make the show, but Harry Gant's old number 3 Skull Bandit car is banned from the Darlington pre-race show. This is not it's not racing in competition or anything like that. This is just a sort of a tribute lap that they take before. So this car is not able to participate in the pre-show because of the Skull Bandit sponsorship, which is not active currently. Tobacco companies are not allowed to sponsor any sports. But this is an historic car. And it's simply just a couple laps around the racetrack. It's no big deal. I don't know if the pre-show is televised, but the really interesting thing about this is that any time that NASCAR does this kind of throwback paint scheme, or they race an historic car that's actually been in competition, they all have the Winston Cup sticker on the car. It's small, but it's there because tobacco used to sponsor the Winston Cup.
Right.
So I just thought that was some interesting news that came out this week, relevant to something I like to watch. And also, of course, this is Skull Bandit, which was, this was one of the first things that the antis went after, claiming that R.J. Reynolds was making, or U.S. Smokeless at the time, I get them all confused, was making a modified risk claim in their marketing, saying take a pinch instead of a puff.
Right.
Which I've said many times is simply stating that drink Coke instead of Pepsi.
Right.
There is no modified risk claim there, but that was back in the 80s. So it would have been great to see a smoke-free product turning laps around Darlington, but no, we can't be trusted with that. So,
and
it's almost like a weird like NASCAR rewriting history or something. Like we don't want to show this. We want to ignore that this was a thing, and we're not going to allow this.
I don't know that whitewashing is the appropriate term, but we've seen this with all of the activism around that's
basically what it is
in their programs, and it's not tobacco washing, it's not greenwashing. I don't quite know what to call it, but it very much is sort of this ministry of information. Let's rewrite the history and pretend like smoking never existed or use of smoke-free tobacco products. So
I mean, really, what are they accomplishing by not allowing that car? I mean,
they're protecting the children. Obviously,
I just
got to protect the children from the Skull Bandit 33 classic 1991 Cup car. All right,
I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, I had a plastic, like a big, play with NASCAR thing, and it was this car. But it had nothing to do with me using tobacco products. I got most of that from my dad.
Right.
Sponsorships on a race car.
Well, it's like I've always said, like how many people actually started smoking because of Joe Camel. But anyhow, I don't know. I'm interested to hear what Clive thinks about this whole.
I know. I was going to try to segue. Like the real bandit of the hour is our special guest. So I vote that we just bring him in now. We get this show started. Are we ready?
Do you want to do the bumper thing?
We're just going to play the deep dive bumper. Should I play the take 3 bumper?
No.
I think it's just kind of it's a free for all with the bumpers at this point. We got to coax Danielle into a special guest bumper.
We do.
All right, let's do the thing. Clive,
where am I?
He's finally with us. He's been waiting so patiently in the back.
Yeah.
Welcome, Clive.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining us on this this lovely Saturday evening for you.
Yeah.
So,
greetings from Nigeria, where it's now 9:42 in the evening. So that's my time check.
How's Nigeria these days?
Hot, rainy, unstable, wild, fun, strange, all of those things.
All the good things.
Yeah, interesting place. It's a very interesting place.
You live there now?
You know, Nigeria will have the same population as the United States by 2047. That's our UN projections. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's let me get this right. 70% of the population are under 30 and 44% are under 16. It's an amazing place. Yeah.
Wow. That is a population boom.
That is a nuclear population explosion. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. Well, I'm sure that that plenty of I see in chat here, Clive Bates is a warrior already. Welcome, Clive. Thank you for everything you do. So a lot of people here are well familiar with you, but for folks who are not, could you tell us about yourself, a little bit about what you do, your background, and kind of how you got into tobacco harm reduction, really?
Okay. Let me give you a quick march through my CV. So I did a degree in engineering at Cambridge University. I worked for the IT company IBM. Then I joined Greenpeace. Then I was director of action on smoking and health. Then I joined Tony Blair's Prime Minister's strategy unit in the British government. I was an advisor to him. Then head of policy at the UK's main environment regulator. Then I went to UN Environment Programme in Sudan. Then back to the UK to work for the Welsh government, then struck out on my own if counterfactual consulting, returning to the harm reduction issue because I see it as the biggest conceivable public health win of all time. if it's actually executed properly, which unfortunately isn't being. And then through my family, I lived in Zimbabwe from 2014 to 18, and in Nigeria from 2018 till now, because my wife is a diplomat. So that's basically my story. I'm a kind of policy guy, really, but I think to be successful in policy, you have to have a bit of a grip of science, economics, behavior change, and all these other things. Otherwise, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's we see quite a lot of that. So yeah, that's me. That's my little potted history. Yeah, so I've had quite an interesting and varied career. But this is fascinating, this whole tobacco harm reduction thing. As I say, people think it's a trivial issue. It's like, oh, it's just people vaping or whatever. They're forgetting 8 million people a year die from smoking. 1 billion people in the world smoke. That's going to continue just through intergenerational influence as, young people are brought up in smoking households, unless there's a dramatic intervention to change it. And a dramatic intervention born of technology is now available. The whole smoking thing could be over in 10 to 20 years if everybody got behind it. But strangely, the people who should care about it are pushing in the wrong direction and slowing down what could be a very rapid and dramatic diffusion of innovation. And that has boiled my piss, to be honest, beyond anything else I've ever experienced.
I'm sort of curious. I don't know if this isn't one of our scripted questions that we prepared for here, but first of all, I assume you've had the opportunity to look at the recent research published by Dr. Carl Phillips and Mary Glover, in looking at the Surgeon General's announcement, and that this idea of that initial shock echoing through generations and influencing people to stop or not start smoking. And now that we see in the US smoking prevalence among young people down below 2%, I mean, to me, it seems like, just looking at that at face value, that we are on the precipice, kind of no matter what, of I hate to say it, I absolutely hate to say smoke-free generation, but it's with more parents quitting and less children being influenced by that and going to smoking, that perhaps within a few years the graduating class won't smoke at all.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, this is already. Essentially, a transition is already underway through generational cohorts. So, I don't think anybody who's under 25 today will smoke past their 50th birthday, and therefore almost nobody will in the US. I'm talking about. Almost nobody will die from smoking-related diseases who is a young person today. It's very unlikely they will die of vaping-related diseases, because the risk is kind of in the noise of, if there is any risk at all, it's kind of in the noise of risky behaviors that people do, like, drinking too much, eating too much bacon, having too much of the wrong sort of fat. It's not going to be something that's a big killer from the current generational cohort as it ages, because they will either never start smoking. They'll if they're going to use nicotine, they'll go straight to vaping, or at some time in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, they'll switch to vaping, and that's it, done. They're not going to be dying of these diseases in the way that my grandmother's generation died in their thousands, because they sort of chain smoked. Smoking was absolutely in their DNA, right, through starting when they were 15 and going right on until they were in their 70s and they dropped dead with cancer. You remember, you have to smoke for a long time before you have a noticeable effect on mortality. So if you quit smoking before you're 40, you don't suffer any life expectancy penalty. So when people, go on about how terrible smoking is, bear in mind, you can smoke for like 25 years and not suffer, 15 to 40, and not suffer a life expectancy penalty. I'm not trying to encourage people to do that, but it's a measure of how resilient the human body is. So if in future, people are, and they will, if they're going to carry on using nicotine, switch to vaping or heated tobacco product or pouches or whatever before they're 40, the thing is gone. And that's happening with the high school generation that's going through the US schools now. We've seen an amazing effect among young women in Norway, where regular smoking is down to less than 1% there. And what you've seen, though, is that 15% are using snus. Okay, so they're not, and people are going, oh, well, this is an epidemic of snus because they didn't smoke in the first place, as if it's only harm reduction if you smoke first and then switch to something safer, rather than go straight to the safer thing. And this is
Amen, Clive.
Yeah, this is the point that we talk about all the time. The idea that you have to, that harm is a prerequisite to using a safer product.
Yeah,
to me, it's absurd. I mean, the entire idea that you have to smoke for X number of decades before something like vaping or pouches or something that is appropriate for you is just completely backwards to me.
Well, I mean, this raises for me a pretty fundamental point, actually, because I mean, everybody in the public health side, me included, that harm reduction, the appalling burden of disease. Let's reduce that, and we've got these safer products. Substitute, boom, you get a health benefit. Okay,
and then quit that.
That is the wrong way of thinking about it for the long term, in my view. Okay, in the long term, you need to think of it as, look, there's a legal, legitimate form of substance use here, nicotine, and the goal of policy should be to get the risk of doing that down to an acceptable level, or at least have options to do that at an acceptable level. And there's no harm reduction thing there. It's just the same as saying, well, we'd like substance use to be safe. Or relatively safe at an acceptable risk within the normal risk appetites of society. And the problem with the harm reduction argument is, at some point, people say, well, look, all the smoking's gone. Now we don't need these vaping devices anymore because they've done their work. Let's get on with our real agenda, which is getting rid of nicotine. And that's a dangerous thing, and we need to get rid of that too. And I think people sort of need to feel more strongly the war on drugs mindset that sort of sits behind some of the harm reduction people as well. It's it's a difficult issue to raise because nobody wants to say they're in favor of nicotine use, just as no one wants to say they're in favor of cannabis use or opioid use or whatever. But these things happen. The question is, does it make sense to try and eliminate them? And if you do you just make the problem worse? And I think you generally do.
Yeah, I mean, at least here in the U.S., we've spent the last 50 years with a militarized police force against, people who use drugs in this country. And it clearly has just made things so much better, with incarceration rates higher than they've ever been, skyrocketing overdose rates, a volatile drug market, huge successes across the board. And you would think, that policy, makers and lawmakers would look at, just the horrendous downfall that has been the war on drugs and learn something. But in some cases we are in this country. It's just very slow that we're getting there. But in regards to nicotine, it just feels like we're just walking backwards. We're going the wrong direction.
Well, let me venture a kind of theory on why prohibition is so popular, despite its absolutely abysmal outcomes, that go from, people dying in squalor, massive criminal networks, entire narco states, whole continents destabilized sometimes. It's appealing to politicians because it's essentially an abdication of responsibility. You say, I've banned this. I've used the most forceful regulation you can possibly dream up. It's now a policing and in some cases a military matter to deal with it. I, the politician, have taken the strongest possible measure. There's nothing more I can do. And of course, that is a gigantic abdication of responsibility, because all the unintended consequences that I just mentioned, the violence, the criminal networks, the terrorist finance, the deaths of despair and squalor, all of that stuff is still real, and it's still a predictable and predicted consequence of prohibition. But somehow politicians get to say, not my problem, law enforcement issue, or criminal behavior. And I think that's why it's appealing. And I think that's why you tend to see politicians like it in office, and then they're sort of skeptical about it once they've left. I mean, I was of these arguments with people about, we occasionally get an ecstasy death in the UK. It's usually because the product's illegal and is contaminated with something awful. But the problem is, if you make it legal, the politicians say, well, that death is then on my watch. I made it legal, and I'm now responsible for it, and I have to deal with the parent and a reporter with a microphone in my face. And I think that selfish sort of attitude to responsibility is behind the impulse to prohibition. Anyway, I digress, but that's just.
Well, we digress a lot. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're actually teeing up some questions I expected to kind of get to eventually, but I feel like I might as well strike while the iron's hot, and I think you sort of answered it, but some of the things that I've been reading, I just picked up this book, which I've just started thumbing through it, but I don't know if there's a school of thought within drug policy and drug research, or if it's just a few people kind of getting started. But this idea that substance use, the pursuit of an altered state of consciousness, or just run-of-the-mill relief from pain, has been part of the human experience really for thousands of years. I mean, arguably we have evolved with drug taking, and some of the I think part of that perspective is that for at least a percentage of the population, drugs are arguably necessary. And one of the things kind of coming out of this is this idea that as nicotine has come down, rates of depression and suicide have gone up. And so I don't know that I'm not a scientist, and I don't have all of those credentials, but that to me, that seems first, plausible. We have an epidemic of pain and anxiety and depression, at least in our country. And people will seek out these experiences, but to tackle that, I think is just a huge lift for any politician. I mean, just thinking about it, I think, makes people a bit crazy, because we're talking about going to, the foundation of society. It is the way that we have built the world around us. And when I was thinking about this, I kept referring to like the Rat Park experiment, where, rats are socialized and they don't choose to use the drugs that are freely available to them. Put them in a cage and they'll press the pedal until they die. And so, we have built this environment where we're essentially in our own prison and isolated, more and more isolated. Of course, isolation and division, the tactic of people who want to go after this particular behavior, marginalizing people, stigmatizing drug use and so on, just sort of making things worse. And so ultimately, if there is a question here, and I do think you answered it already, but that war on the drug, any drug, is really kind of a useful distraction for politicians. Like you said, they don't have to claim that the disaster happened on their watch. They did everything to ban it. But it's more of this sort of diversionary tactic from actually addressing the real issues at the core of society.
I mean, this is a really interesting area for me, Alex. Especially as I confess I've never used nicotine in any form. I don't know what it's like to use it. I rely entirely on testimonials, of which the CASAA collection is unbelievably persuasive, in my view. But one of the interesting things in tobacco control is there's a denial that there is any pleasure or benefit in nicotine. And you hear this a lot, that people will say, essentially it's like a treadmill. The only benefit you get from it is relief from withdrawal and satisfying cravings. You're not actually experiencing any other benefits at all. And I don't believe that. I really don't believe that line, but it's extremely strong. And there was a great post on Jim McDonald's Vaping 360 thing where he listed 9 benefits of nicotine. It's like, does anybody really want to talk about that? Does anybody? No,
no, they don't.
Sorry, I shouldn't even.
Yeah, I mean, we do, but people in tobacco control certainly don't.
But it's really interesting because it's like, as far as I can see, and again, I come at this having to, if you like, synthesize knowledge rather than have knowledge of experience. But it seems to me that it has benefits, sort of regulatory benefits, that it makes people who are anxious or stressed, it makes them feel a bit more normal, a bit calmer, a bit more relaxed, a bit more together. And that sounds like quite a big benefit to me. And actually, it's really interesting. Neil Benevitz's paper, Neil Benevitz, he's a really decent guy, and he's one of the great sort of gurus of nicotine, the science of, opens with all of these benefits. He kind of says, these are the things that it does, stress relief, anxiety modulation, concentration. And then we see these studies that say, oh, look, there's all these cognitive benefits that are popping up. So yeah, ADHD, I'm absolutely convinced that is that will have a beneficial effect there. Yeah, there's a denial that there can be any benefit here, that it can be a functional drug in the way that people would recognize alcohol as a functional drug. It makes you feel, happy, makes you feel relaxed, makes you feel a bit looser. Or caffeine, gets you started. People say, well, you maybe if you'd never had caffeine, you wouldn't miss it. But it's almost impossible to get a debate going about that, or to get science done that kind of quantifies what those things are, or really sets out what the reward system looks like. But I'm rambling a bit. But it's the reason I want to raise it is because it's why I think nicotine is a much, much more persistent thing than smoking. Nicotine will be with us for all time, basically, or for the foreseeable future. Smoking will not, I think. Smoking, we will find, not necessarily yet, but in the next 10 to 15 years of continued innovation, we will find nicotine products that are sufficient kind of analog for smoking, that almost everyone who smokes will find that they're satisfactory alternatives to smoking if they want to take nicotine or get some of the experience that they get from smoking. I don't know, but that's what I'm guessing. And therefore, the question is, for the longer term, how should this drug, this stimulant, be made available? In what form what forms should it be discouraged? Should it be prevented? Should it be regulated to try and create a market for people who want to use the drug that is acceptably safe, i.e. within the normal risk appetites that we have in society, rather than very dangerous? And that's why I think it's important to move beyond harm reduction and start to think of this as a drug or a stimulant that we want to be available in a way that's acceptable for users. And that's the vapors will already understand that, because that's smoking something that's behind them for most of them. So they're looking forward now, thinking, well, how do I want to use this drug over the next few years or decades? And, or do I want to stop using it? So that, to me, is an important reconceptualization of the public health arguments around this, from a harm reduction intervention, which is like a sort of pimped up NRT in the minds of many, to a safer or more acceptable form of a quite popular stimulant that people like and get benefits from.
I feel like it should be a socially acceptable drug, basically, like caffeine. I mean, people can say, oh, I'm such a caffeine addict, and people go, oh, isn't that cute, haha, funny, and they don't take, they're fine with it. But if you say the same thing about nicotine, something's seriously wrong with you. And I think that stigma, and then also with tobacco control, just putting so much misinformation out there about nicotine itself, that I think it's almost having a reverse effect, that people that would seek out that it's okay to use nicotine. It is. Yeah, it is. Okay. But smoking is really bad for you, so try these other products. Okay, I feel okay switching, as opposed to nicotine is horrible, smoking is horrible, so you shouldn't do any of it. Well, I'm going to be doing something, so I may as well keep smoking. I feel like it's almost as backwards. It's doing worse instead of helping. But
oh my God, I mean, I agree so much with that, Kristen. I mean, it's the deep conflation of smoking and nicotine is a real problem. And as you know, if you look at the HINTS data for this risk perception data, you know, most people think that nicotine is the agent in smoking that causes cancer, heart disease, and so on. Of course, it isn't. But it's not just the historic accumulation of that misunderstanding. It's, as you say, it's an active promotion of that misunderstanding that we see now, because sitting behind tobacco control are not public health objectives of the type that I came into the game for, you know, dealing with cancer and heart disease and poor old guys on ventilators and trying to, you know, oxygen tanks to deal with their COPD and all these wretched ways of living that people have when they've been smoking for many decades. That's to me the interesting area. Can you deal with that? Behind all this, there is actually a war on drugs mindset that is repulsed by nicotine use, and it's internalized disgust for nicotine use and nicotine users, and that's the thing that it's sort of going after. And one of the great ironies of this, and again, you were mentioning Carl Phillips earlier, he did a brilliant paper a few years back on the economics of harm reduction, in which he points out that as soon as you reduce the harms, you're basically reducing the cost to the user. It's a non-monetized cost, but it's still a cost if you get cancer and you die early and all these other things. And when you reduce the cost of something, you expect the demand to go up. And if you look at the data on why people stop smoking, it's almost entirely to do with, I'm already feeling ill health. My doctor has terrified me about future ill health. I'm worried about inflicting ill health on people around me. And I'm worried about my kids growing up to be smokers and them suffering ill health. What happens to all that reasoning in a situation where there isn't any ill health, or the ill health is trivial? And, you know, like
you'd have coffee.
Yeah, you're moving towards coffee. And then you say, well, actually, we've lost the whole rationale to be opposed to this thing. And then people have lost the rationale to stop using it. Oh my God, the use could increase. And, you know, I always have this thought experiment that I use with the sort of people who go white at the thought of this, which is, imagine two communities. One has 20% smoking and no vaping. The other has 10% smoking and 30% vaping. Okay, so it's half the smoke. The second one is half the smoking, twice the nicotine use. Which one do you prefer? Okay, and some people find that an extremely uncomfortable question. Most people in vaping and harm reduction find it pretty easy, is that they would get rid of the smoking and have more vaping. But for some people, it forces them to think about what they're actually in the business for. And that question is a pretty tough one to put to some people in tobacco control. But I'm very much in the camp that you should expect more nicotine use, because you're making it much less dangerous. You know, and we shouldn't lose our minds because people take it up, realizing they're not going to drop dead with cancer, heart disease, or COPD. Because the reason we oppose nicotine in the first place was cancer, heart disease, and COPD, not because we're against people using what is essentially a relatively innocuous stimulant compared to all the other stimulants and drugs that are on the market.
Yeah. Amen to you and just literally everything that you've said so far.
Starting to rant already. Only early, and I'm ranting.
I'm behind you 1,000% right now.
You're just keeping us from ranting, so you know it's
okay. All right. So maybe it's therapeutic.
It is. You go for it.
Sometimes you just got to get it out, right?
Oh, but, man, I rarely get the chance. But this is great.
I do have a question for you. One that is kind of one that we prepared. seeing as your expertise in tobacco and policy in the UK, how does the UK differ from the US in regards towards attitudes and regulation of vapor products?
All right. Attitudes are very different. Let's start with regulation, okay? Because some people in the US and worldwide think that the UK is a sort of vapors paradise, and kind of isn't actually. The main product regulation that we have in the UK comes from the European Union and was agreed as the Tobacco Products Directive in 2014. It's pretty poor regulation, but it's immeasurably superior to the regulatory regime in the United States. Okay, and there are a couple of really important differences that I want to stress. The first is that it's a notification rather than an authorization regime. In other words, there isn't a bureaucrat somewhere that has to say yes before a product is put on the market. The product goes on the market, providing you notify into a big database and you put some information about the product and off you go. Okay, so there isn't a Mitch Zeller or a Matt Holman that has to put a digital signature on a marketing approved order and send it out. And, that doesn't happen. And for that reason, there is a vibrant vaping market across the European Union. Most countries will have thousands of different products available, and the profile of the market, I would say, looks a bit like, and I use this analogy a lot, the American beer market. So you've got some big players, BAT, PMI, Japan Tobacco and whatever, with the tobacco companies, Juul to some extent. And then you've got this long tail of medium-sized, and in the beer analogy, microbreweries, tap rooms, pub brewers, and so on. Relatively small companies for whom the regulation is not so overpowering that they can actually get into the market, and the barriers to entry are relatively low, but not completely low, so that any old bandit can get in, and the market pretty well functions. The Tobacco Products Directive also functions around something that's different to the US, which is a set of standards. Okay, so if you meet the standards in the directive, you put your products, and there's some local national variation on what those standards are, so it's a bit complicated, but no need to go into that. But the basic principle is that if you can meet the standards, notify the product, you're on the market unless some issue develops, and at which case action is taken retrospectively. And that has created a diverse, working, rich market in the European Union and in the UK that serves consumers pretty well. We also have a few things like stupid warnings. We have some things like the nicotine cap at 20 milligrams per milliliter, which is like a dumb idea. But interestingly, when they agreed that, and this is like a pure ignorance play, they agreed that because they thought that would give equivalent nicotine delivery to a cigarette. So in their kind of mad minds, and this is all settled by politicians rather than technocrats as well. Right. So it's a negotiation in the European Parliament, Commission and Council, which is all politicians. They thought they were setting a limit that would mean that vaping products had equivalent nicotine delivery to cigarettes, because it didn't understand a damn thing about nicotine delivery, titration, how users essentially control their own dose, modulate their own intake to get the dose that they want. They didn't understand any of that. So we've ended up with that as a particularly stupid piece of regulation. And there's some other dumb things as well, but generally it works. So UK is different because I would say there is a consensus amongst the leading experts and leading institutions and the tobacco control groups, and that she gets a lot of bad press, but Deborah Arnott has done an amazing job at forging that consensus quietly behind the scenes. Not always to my liking, but she needs some credit for what she's achieved. Then you got these academics like Anne McNeil, Peter Hayek, John Britton at the Royal College of Physicians, or he was, not now, but Robert West, Jamie Brown, Leon Shahab, Shahab rather, those people have done an amazing job. You've got a supportive group where you have CDC in the United States, which is like a ridiculous anti-vaping propaganda machine full of, vile amateurs. You have Public Health England in the UK or in England, which sort of takes its mission seriously and has some good people who've understood the big prize here and are pursuing it. And that's the reason we see vaping or switching to vaping actually advertised on TV by Public Health England in the annual Stoptober campaign. And hell would freeze over before you'd see that from CDC. We also have a supportive regulator. They don't play a particularly big role, but the medicines and the MHRA, the medicines regulator in the UK, broadly wants these products on the market. They would like a medicalized product licensed as a medicine. They think that would reach deeper into the healthcare system. I agree with them, as long as it's done in the right way and not the only way, if you see what I mean, as long as it was done in parallel to the other things. I don't think it's a bad thing to do. We've got pretty sensible guidance on workplace vaping and vaping in public places, which is none of this, you must ban it, but advice on the pros and cons of it. And essentially, the decision is devolved to owners and managers of properties, consistent with, sort of property rights view of this. But with advice on where do you do it? If you're in a food shop or a play group, maybe not. If you're in, if you run a bar, you want to do it. You want to have one room for vaping. You want to have the whole place for vaping because there's 4 other bars in the town. You want to have vape night on Thursday. All of these things are all covered, and you get advice on the pros and cons. Okay, and what to think about, recognizing that for many of your customers, this will be an alternative to smoking, and you can do them a big favor and attract them, particularly in the poorer areas. Something else we've also, I think, got quite a sensible view, and we'll see what comes out in the reviews that are coming up, that this is a potential health inequity issue. And that, because smoking drives so much of the difference in life expectancy between rich groups in society, and there are gradients everywhere: employment, unemployment, education, poor education, mental health, good mental health, bad mental health, and so on. All of those gradients are really unhealthy, really damaging, and show that the smoking-related diseases are increasingly concentrated in disadvantaged populations. That is an argument that has resonance in the UK. For reasons I cannot understand, it seems to have absolutely no resonance with Democrats in the United States, who should be seizing on that argument, because that should be their natural consistency, but they seem to have lost their minds on actually relating to people who are their natural allies. And it's taken seriously as a possible way that we could, help to ease both the economic burdens and the health burdens, welfare burdens that are concentrated in poorer groups. And again, going back to the Carl Phillips Maria Glover thing, you've also, if you're interested in kids in those poorer groups, then doing something about parental smoking is the best thing you can do for the kids. Not bloody banning vaping. It's like forget flavors. If you really want to explain why people smoke, look at their environment. Look at the people, look at the significant adults in their lives, their parents, their guardians, their carers, their relatives, the people that they see in their lives, and do something for those adults, and you'll fix the youth smoking problem. And to be honest, that's why you get a massive social class gradient in smoking in teenagers, because the parents of the well-to-do kids have already quit smoking and years ago, and that's why they are freaking out about vaping. And again, we go into the sort of, the class nature of this problem. But I think it's quite an important thing. But to return to the UK, there's a view that this harm reduction intervention could be beneficial in the poorest groups in society, and particularly if we can embed it more deeply in the healthcare system, because those people tend to have more contact with the healthcare system, because they're not very well and they're poor.
Yeah, forgot what I was going to say. The panic over the number of kids in the U.S. who have had at least one puff in the last 30 days. It seems like they've completely ignored the fact, and I remember this from the early days of getting into advocacy and looking up at the numbers when more kids were actually smoking, and you could go on to tobacco control websites and see claims like 3,000 kids a day have tried their first, today have tried their first cigarette. Now, not that they would be, and then I forget what the number was for the number who would actually became a regular smoker. And it seems like they completely, that whole statistic has completely left their brain when they say, all these kids are trying vaping, now they're vapors, it's like they know for a fact that kids will try things, because they knew that these 3,000 kids would try their first cigarette a day, but not that many actually became a smoker on that day either.
This again raises for me a really interesting set of questions, because I don't know if you saw it, but there was a commentary a couple of weeks ago. Ken Warner and Abby Friedman, who are great, by the way. They're both, very pro harm reduction. They're very pragmatic. Ken Warner was the driving force behind the 15 presidents, SRNT presidents paper, American Journal of Public Health, which I think was a brilliant effort on his part and those guys. But they kind of have approach to vaping, and this is common in the sort of public health side. Is like, can we have our cake and eat it? Maybe we can design regulation and taxation and communications messages so that the kids are protected from uptake and vaping and nicotine, and then the adults can get all the vaping that they need to quit smoking, and boom, we've won. And I'm like, I don't think you can kind of separate things that easily. There are some things you can do. Obviously, age restrictions is one of them, but don't expect too much of an effect from that. You'll just see a secondary trade in the products, playground market. Yeah, of course. And smoking. I mean, it's like we've had age limits on smoking. It doesn't stop like 11-year-olds somehow smoking. So I think the other approach to this is to say, why not stop losing your minds about teenagers doing things that adults do, especially things that aren't that harmful, like vaping? Okay, get a bit more of a sense of perspective here. If you have a kind of approach of zero tolerance of anybody under 18 doing anything that an adult does, or vaping, or using a flavored vape, and you design regulation to try to stop every last one of them doing anything, then you will end up with no market. You'll end up with a kind of rubbish that we got in the United States, where the only products that are available are the ones that people don't want. Tobacco flavored, useless, kind of obsolete Vuse Solo and things like that. I mean, that is not the way to deal with a youth risk behavior that is inevitable. The teenagers will always do what adults do. They will always do these things, some of them anyway. And frankly, isn't that harmful?
Yeah,
it's
we're
not.
talking about a group of people who were eating Tide Pods not long ago. I mean.
But if you do, if anyone wants to look at this, I did a blog a while back on sort of 20 things about the US flavor ban. This was when flavor bans were all in favor during the Trump administration. And I put some data in there. And if you look at what actually kills teenagers, like really harms them in like totally harmful way, like dead, then it's accidents. And those accidents are road accidents. And they're road accidents for which, you don't know this, but are likely to have a drinking driving under the influence element to them. And it's like, we don't even, I mean, even though they are tragic, and that is the dominant cause of adolescent mortality, we don't lose our minds over alcohol. You know, we do. Alcohol's much more dangerous for young people. You know, you've got driving under the influence, violence, various forms of vulnerability, from, sexual or just general abuse. You've got the risk of accidents, all of those things, much, much more harmful, much more acute than somebody just puffing on a vape, sitting on a park bench somewhere. Yet we have managed to problematize the there it is. That's not the one.
Not the one.
That isn't actually the one. It is another 20 reasons, but that's 20.
That's the nicotine. That's
the VLNC one. It's 20 things you should know, I think, or 20 things you should know about flavors. Yeah. Oh God. There we go. All right.
Anyhow,
I promise.
That's favors. No wonder.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, they've so demonized nicotine that they seem to see this, any nicotine use, they're going to be addicted for life, and addiction is horrible. And I mean, I've been having this argument with this woman, she's a vapor, on Twitter about it. And she's saying, well, that they're going to have this habit, even if they don't start smoking, and, you shouldn't be putting anything in your body. And I'm like, do you drink coffee? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And I think that it just seems like like I've said many times, the nicotine addiction, which I don't think it's an addiction if there's no harm coming from it, is any worse than coffee. But that has superseded, like you said earlier, the fact that you were trying, the whole reason to get people to stop using nicotine was to stop them from exposing themselves to the smoke. Exactly. And now it's all about, we can't have them using nicotine. We don't want them using nicotine. And, I read your comment to Health Canada about their.
You're probably the only one that has.
I admit I did not read the entire thing, but because the one thing that came up was about the nicotine caps, because I've often got into arguments with I don't know if I'm going to say arguments so much, but I have discussions. Very frequently, people will pop up from the EU or from the UK. Because what you said, because you did that with David Sweener, right? The quote that I had pulled out that was that we believe there are several legitimate challenges to the proposal for a nicotine cap, because that was one of the things that Health Canada is following along you guys with, that have not been satisfactorily addressed in the impact analysis. And I was curious about if you would talk about what those things are, because all the time I get people from the UK and stuff. It's like, well, you guys have a teen vaping epidemic because you don't have nicotine caps. You should just have nicotine caps. I mean, they come up with, and like, no, we didn't even have a teen vaping epidemic. That's ridiculous. And they think that we should do the same thing that you guys did. So can you tell us why we shouldn't?
The UK people saying that are wrong. They're talking baloney. They don't know what they're on about, basically. We actually have more smoking than you have in the United States amongst young people. Yeah, right. And there's an interesting study by the ITC group comparing, I think, England, United States, Canada, maybe one other country, Australia possibly. And it was quite interesting. So the sort of supposedly vaping paradise of England, you could argue we didn't have enough teenage vaping because we'd still got a lot of teenage smoking going on. So it's like, hang on a minute. We know, I mean, basically what we know about young people and vaping and smoking is that there's a massive amount of froth here of kids who are using, like a few times a month, pissing around at parties, blowing clouds, being silly, being kids. Okay, because that's what kids do. Okay, they're not in some sort of compulsive substance use disorder, which is, almost you'd think from some of the tobacco control people, the moment you pick one of these things up, you're completely you're like a nicotine junkie, right? And then you have the interesting group, which is the people who have a high propensity to use nicotine. Okay, because it's in their head, and I've just trying to do my graphics for the e-cig summit next week, and I'm like, how do you illustrate the deep misunderstanding about this? Nicotine addiction is not caused by the device, okay? It's caused by stuff in the head and the stuff that surrounds you. It's about you as an individual, your genes, your mental state, your degree of stress, the influences that are around you, the extent to which you're positive, all of these things. And I remember it's in the amicus brief that we put into that me, David Sweener, David Abrams and Ray Noura put into some of the US cases against the FDA, the people who are challenging these marketing denial orders. And so there's this study in which the guy has basically looked at all the risk factors for smoking, and he's analyzed 54 different studies and found 96 different things that drive smoking. Okay, I think they're all things to do with you as a person and the context in which you live. They're not to do with flavors or patterns on the pack, or they may have some sort of marginal sort of influence, but they're much more deeply rooted than those things. And that's the problem with things like flavor bans. If there are deeper drivers for nicotine use and you take away the flavors, the driver for nicotine use doesn't go away, it just goes somewhere else. It either goes back to smoking, or it goes to, well, let's make our own, or let's buy some illegally, or let's set up a black market in disposables, or whatever. And this is sort of incredible infantile understanding of the underlying drivers of these kind of substance uses that is leading agencies like CDC and FDA astray, because they think, I don't know what they think you ban flavors, someone who vapes will do what? They'll give up everything and join a choir. They'll do more piano practice. The homework.
They'll take up bird watching.
Well, that was a CDC.
Yeah, it was.
That was so dumb.
It's been an ongoing joke here.
Yeah,
Bird
watching.
Or
what are kids gonna do? You get away flavors. Kids will just go pray, do their prayers before bed, and read a book, right? I mean, that's what kids will do if you ban flavors. They won't do any other drugs.
Look, I'm sure there are some kids who, if you did ban flavors, they wouldn't vape, but they're not the problem ones. They were never going to carry on vaping for the rest of their lives. They were never going to get sick from it. They were never going to get addicted. They were just messing around in the first place. The interesting group, and the only group that's really of any interest from a public health point of view, are the people who are inclined to use nicotine intensively because of the stuff that's about them and going on in their lives. And with them, in the great vaping epidemic, what you find is that the frequent users are very heavily correlated with the people who were smoking or would otherwise be likely to smoke. Okay, and therefore, the youth vaping epidemic, when you strip away the froth of the faddish occasional use, which has all come right down again rapidly after the peak in 2019, you're left with the interesting group, which is the people for whom this is an alternative. In other words, it's a harm reduction effect that is either helping them stop smoking before they emerge from adolescence as hardened smokers, or it's diverting them from taking up smoking in the first place. Right. And you can argue that if you properly do the proper anthropology on the youth vaping epidemic, that the whole thing has been enormously beneficial, because the supposedly bad headline numbers are basically froth and will disappear and will never become entrenched habits. And what's happening is, in the interesting group, the people inclined to use nicotine, has been beneficial, net benefit. No one likes that argument, but it does have the merits of being very probably true. So,
and like you said, that, well, like before, about it not being instantly, it doesn't catch you instantly. And there's a reason why there's far more former smokers or people who tried smoking and never became smokers than there are people who actually smoke daily or become daily smokers. There's something in it that you try that product and you go, it's okay. And then you never do it again, or you try it and there's something in your brain, there's something that goes, yeah, that's what I was looking for. And you go back. And that's not, you're not immediately addicted. And they seem to think that if a kid tries it because it's flavored, which I never understood. Oh, look, it's gummy bear. It's illegal. It's very expensive. I can get in trouble, or I can just go buy some gummy bears. It's just the dumbest argument to me, but they're not going to get immediately hooked for life because they tried it once because of a flavor. But that's what they're arguing.
There are multiple levels of dumbness in this. It's like a skyscraper of dumbness. Basically, it's the Empire State Building of dumbness at work here. But one of the things that it's sometimes worth pointing out. First of all, we have thousands of flavors in Europe, and we don't have a youth vaping epidemic. So if flavors were the big cause of vaping, why don't we have a youth vaping epidemic in the UK? Secondly, if you go back a couple of decades, you'll find that somehow 12th graders smoking prevalence, so that's literally tobacco flavor, actual tobacco flavor, not the sort of synthetic thing that you get in vapes, was sufficient for them for 30 to 40% of them to smoke. Okay. We had very high levels of smoking prevalence among young people, implying that it was perfectly possible, if the people wanted to do it, to have high levels of nicotine use with actual tobacco flavor. And that, again, tells you that it's something about what's going on in the minds of the people and their surroundings, and not what's going on in the device or the product that is driving the use of nicotine.
I was just going to say that takes me on to one of the other questions that we had about one of the questions that I had for you is, why do you think the UK didn't have a teen vaping epidemic or an EVALI outbreak, which you kind of answered. And we kind of know the answer with EVALI. But I was going to point out that, and we were talking about Canada, and then last week we had Dr. Colin Mendelsohn on from Australia. Yeah. And one of the things that we thought was interesting was that Canada and Australia have kind of a closer tie to the UK than the US really does, but they seem to have followed us into the madness instead of following UK into some semblance of reasonableness. Why do you think UK and Australia are doing that?
Okay. Well, first of all, in the UK, vaping is sort of positioned as an old gits thing. Okay, so the advertising for it is when it's the public service advertising is targeted at middle-aged older smokers who are actually the at-risk population. They are the people you should be most worried about. They're the people where you can get the biggest health benefits if they switch. If you're over 40 and you're smoking, you're starting to get into deep trouble with your health. And at that age, that's the age you want to get people to switch, because they're not going to quit that easily, particularly if they're in communities with a lot of smokers. Okay, so that's been a positioning in the UK, and it's made it maybe less appealing. But I think we'll see more youth vaping. We're bound to. We'll see. And what I'm hoping is that we don't lose our minds over it. That we just go, well, this is just, it's like we have youth drinking. We have all these other youth things, all these things that adolescents do that adults do, and we shouldn't lose our minds. We should stay focused on the real goal. And I'm worried that we may go the other way. On EVALI, by the way, we did have an EVALI epidemic. We had an EVALI epidemic of American-originated bullshit, which flows across the Atlantic, and sort of forms an information contagion. And actually, it was some good work done by UCL that measured the change in risk perceptions that was caused as that EVALI bullshit tsunami washed up on our shores.
Right.
And one of the things you've got to recognize is that things like there are news is global now. There are the internet news providers like the Mail, massive in the US, massive in the UK, and this stuff just flows around the world. And we obviously haven't had any cases of EVALI, or if they are, there will be due to people personally importing contaminated THC vapes. But we have had an information shock on EVALI that has been damaging. And I remember talking to a taxi driver in London. It's sort of like the sort of bellwether of public opinion on such things. Oh yeah, I used to vape, but he comes out with this stream of stuff. Yeah, the diacetyl's been causing lung injuries or something like that. It's like a mixture of stupid talking points from tobacco control, had all sort of lodged in his mind somewhere and created a very negative impression. And he'd gone back to smoking. Nice job. But yeah, so Australia.
I felt the weight of that sigh all the way over here.
I kind of Australia. Colin Mendelsohn is just the greatest guy ever. How he keeps going, I do not know. But we have patiently made our case over and over again. The like everywhere else, there's just endless consultations, and they do, they pretend to be interested in everything. But in the end, the public health community and its kind of, sociopathic enforcers, let's just leave it at that, have got such a lock on opinion and are so kind of like bullying when it comes to maintaining the consensus. You can't step out of line there. No one does, or very few. That's not true, actually. There are a few really good people in Australia who do speak out, but in the main organizations, there's a lock on opinions on these things, and they've taken the most extreme positions possible, and now they're wondering why they're covered in black market vapes that are coming in, and they're now having a new level of moral panic, thinking this should be even more prohibitive. They're crazy. It's been driven by Greg Hunt, the health minister there, who's decided to make his name on the back of fighting big tobacco, which of course he's not doing. He's actually fighting the health of Australian citizens.
Or big tobacco.
And he's going to go. He's going to go after the next election, so maybe things will change. Canada is an interesting case because at one point Canada was very positive on this. They had very good leadership in Health Canada. Things were heading in the right direction. They had a really innovative policy in which they were going to have a series of statements, 7 statements, about how much better vaping was than smoking, that would allow any vaping company to use in marketing and advertising. Nobody had to prove anything. Health Canada was going to do that, and you were going to be able to use the things to market these products to Canadian smokers and citizens. Great. And then they had, and I'm not going to name names, but then they had a paper that came out in the BMJ that seemed to show that youth vaping and youth smoking were both rising simultaneously. Something that kind of people like me had said, I think that's very unlikely to happen. Yeah. Okay. And that imposed a huge shock in the Health Canada and Canada Health, not surprisingly, if it was taken seriously and if it was true. But that's the catch. It wasn't true. It was a data error. It was a mistake in the methodology. And a couple of years later, after all the damage had been done and Health Canada had reversed its position, that paper was corrected in a very insubstantial way. And that conclusion was reversed. Vaping had gone up and smoking had gone down quite dramatically, was the reality as we'd expected all along. So yeah, and Canada now has got, it's got sort of CDC level of crackpotness in some of the work that it does. And the thing I think you were mentioning earlier about their justification for having a nicotine cap, it was almost impossible to work out how they did like a lot of regulators do. They have to do a cost-benefit analysis on the measures that they introduce. Okay, one of the things to learn to do if you're interested in policy is to try to follow the logic through a cost-benefit analysis. And what you'll find is it's extremely difficult to do. It's like hacking through a jungle of nonsense and distraction.
Right.
But when you get to it, this cost-benefit analysis was almost 100% justified by assuming a gigantic gateway effect from vaping to smoking, and therefore huge costs associated with smoking in terms of mortality and morbidity had been loaded onto the vaping side of the cost-benefit analysis. Okay, but you couldn't find that just by looking at it. You actually had to send off for a special document from Health Canada to actually unpick that. And the consultation they were doing was incredibly opaque about where these numbers had come from. And they didn't say anything like that. But what you found was that they were using an assumption that I think the number was vaping increases the risk of smoking by a factor of 7. And of course, what they'd done was that they'd done a literature review, and that they'd found some of these studies that show an association between vaping and smoking, which is, we get back to this common risk factor problem, which is it's the same things that incline people to smoke also incline them to vape, not surprisingly, but it's not the vaping causing the smoking. Okay, that's the sort of common risk factor confounding or common liability theory, and they've basically fallen for that, or more cynically, had adopted that misunderstanding of the common liability theory and put it into their cost-benefit analysis to justify their flavor ban.
Yeah.
Wow. By the way, is now stuck because the challenge to that seems to have kind of made them think again. So let's see.
I hope so. Well, I think you've helped convince. Hopefully, next time I'm going to take a clip from this video and show it to people from the EU and from the UK who keep telling me that it's worked in the UK. It's been great in the UK. We've avoided all the same problems because we had our cap.
Look, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the analogy I use, it's like saying, okay, we're going to try and stop people getting drunk by reducing the strength of drinks that they can use. So you can only use wine, you can't use whiskey. It's like everything's going to be great. I mean, the key to understanding this is that people try to get the nicotine they want, okay? And sometimes the device stops them doing. I mean, you guys know more about this than I do. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but the device can stop you doing that. Okay, and the big thing that the nicotine cap does is stop you having smaller, more convenient devices that use stronger liquids, a smaller battery, and lower power, aka the Juul type devices, okay, or the pod type devices that use a strong liquid to. But those devices are really important because if you're not used to this, if you're not used to vaping, that's the thing that gets you going. That's the thing that you can buy from a store and get a satisfactory experience from that takes you from smoking into the vaping world. And that's why the Juul product, I think, was so successful, because it was a very good consumer first-time thing that was relatively neat, simple to use. It didn't look like a trombone in terms of its sort of complexity. You didn't need to have some sort of engineering degree to sort of like operate it. Exactly. All of that stuff's incredible barrier to entry to vaping. One of the things, again, I'm going to rant here, but one of the things that I find most annoying is when people in the vaping or harm reduction world sort of become partisan supporters of their favorite device and against everything else. I mean, it is like the most stupid thing imaginable, and the companies do this as well, and they're really annoying when they do it too. Okay, but things like the Juul product create an amazing feedstock of people moving into vaping because they've been able to make that transition with a product that is convenient to use, snaps on, works straight out of the box, and when it's in its strong version, gives a reasonable nicotine experience for somebody who's been smoking. Boom. Then they can start thinking about wild flavors, new devices. Once they've made the transition,
taste comes back, and they're like,
all of that
oh,
stuff.
Yeah,
Exactly.
one of the biggest ironies is when we hear, or we used to hear this a lot, is vape shop owners like very much against these incumbent tobacco products, vapes that are in convenience stores, the Views, the Juul, the what have you.
No,
And
wrong
the
thinking.
counterpoint to that is really, like you just said, so many people, that's where they start. That's where they go to buy their cigarettes. They buy this product, they start, and guess what? From there, they're going to make their way into your shop when they want something
my
new,
God.
when they want something else.
If there's one takeaway, I would take that away. It's like, where is the feedstock of customers coming from? Okay, yeah, there are people who walk into a vape shop and say, guide me through this, but there are millions of people who don't do that. And I think let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I would say, and I'd say to all the big companies as well, have a dog in every fight. Let everybody get to this in whatever way works for them. Okay. Be mindful of predatory practices, predatory pricing, abuse of regulation to try and create market advantages. Those are all the things I don't like. But I think if somebody wants to start on snus, fine. If somebody wants to start on a cheap disposable, fine. Let them try it. Let them get some experience. Let them get going. Okay. Once you've got their interest, then okay, maybe try a Juul, maybe try a decent kind of refillable device, something that's easy to use, and then they can develop their interest. But this idea that there's a right way, my way or the highway, I think is so damaging. And I just wish.
We agree with you.
Good. Well, I thought you would. I knew you were sensible people, but
easy to please.
I think there are probably better ways of getting started than some better ways and worse ways of getting started on vaping, that's for sure, and some advice around that would be good. But on the whole, I would be like, let people find their own way through the market that's regulated about a level like beer, so that you get the kind of diversity that you get in the beer market, and you get the degree of concentration that you get in the beer market with these long tails of small providers. And then you're into and that's more or less what we have in the EU. Then you're into a situation that can serve users' needs via a million different pathways away from smoking and into these products, and keep them happy as long as they want to carry on using nicotine.
Right. Alex, this might be a good segue.
Well, I have all kinds of questions and things to contribute here, but I did want to. Oh God, my head is swimming here. I suspect you've written about this, and watching kind of the policy movements in the States. Obviously our tobacco control industry is throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this, and we've seen legislation introduced here in New York that would ban the use of it's sort of in the vein of banning single-use plastics, and I think is it Linda Rosenthal? Rosenthal and Rosenblum mixed up. One of them is a member of our New York State Assembly from the Upper East Side in the city, and or Upper West Side. Doesn't matter. Upper East Side. She the bill, of course, would ban the use of filters on cigarettes. And I think this might have been something that was part of a California bill. It's single-use plastics, so it would ban pod systems. I guess there's a couple of questions there. I sort of liken this to, of course, the menthol ban or reducing nicotine content in cigarettes. People will just go on the underground market to get their products. But I guess another way to look at this is broadly the single-use products in vaping. As far as you know, are people in the industry maybe taking this as an opportunity to develop products that are recyclable, develop the infrastructure needed to get those products back and get them through the recycling chain? Is anything going in a good direction with that?
Don't really know, actually, but it will have to, because for one thing, I think this is an emerging thing in the EU as well. And I don't, I mean, to be honest, I think it's a pretext, an environmental pretext for essentially a little bit of gratuitous prohibition. Because if you wanted to take a broader approach to plastics, that's not where you would start, to be honest. And particularly if you were mindful of the public health benefits of people switching from smoking to vaping, you would have that philosophy of let them get to it whatever way they want. But nevertheless, it's a pretext, because the underlying policy intent is to be prohibitive about anything to do with vaping that they can get away with. And that's why there's a flavor. It's basically forms of partial prohibition that, taken together, will ultimately add up to a total prohibition. So, partial prohibition on nicotine liquids, prohibition on flavors, single-use plastics, slap-on attacks.
Sure, you end
eventually
up with a de facto ban.
The cumulative thing is a de facto ban. Basically the value proposition that the product offers is no longer attractive to the user or competitive with cigarettes. So you basically have no market for it, which is, there's no doubt that the Bloomberg complex is prohibitionist, because as soon as it's out of sight, outside the developed countries, outside the EU, outside the US, it's nakedly in favor of absolute prohibition, as they pulled off in India, 100 million smokers. And they pulled that off in India because they went straight for prohibition. Now, they don't think they can get away with that in the United States or Europe or Canada. So they have an adaptive strategy, which is to do prohibition by stealth, by the accumulation of prohibitive measures that in total amount to a quasi-prohibition.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, exactly. And there is not a regulation that they do not like. There's nothing where they say, oh, no, that would be too much, or
Right.
that could be counterproductive, or there may be unintended consequences, or there could be a trade-off between our different objectives here. There has never been a regulation that they don't like or don't want strengthened. Okay, and that's basically that's their tell on the fact that they're ultimately prohibitionists in this field. And if they were trying to optimize regulation here, you would see a lot more discussion about unintended consequences, about trade-offs, about different categories. We were talking earlier about different categories of youth with a propensity to smoke versus youth with a propensity not to smoke, are very different groups. You never see any discussion about the difference between those groups in Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. They should be the authority on kids, but they're not. Their kids are a particular uniform reference child that is trotted out for campaign purposes. They're not actually any actual kids who actually live, some of which have real problems and would likely be smokers in the absence of vaping. So and I think they're prohibitionists because that's what they do. That ultimately is where they are. Their leaders and their organizational culture is sort of bellicose. It was brought up in the tobacco wars, from the 80s and 90s. The world changed a great deal in the 2000s and much more again in the 2010s. And they haven't adapted to that. They're carrying on fighting wars. And to fight a war, you need an enemy. And their enemy is the new thing. And the new thing is vaping. So they've just swiveled their gun turrets onto that and they're now blasting away at that.
I just shared the article, that Fighting the Wrong War article in the chat. And that went through the description too. So that's exactly the case. I mean, that's exactly, and that one of the things we were talking about is vaping almost got caught in the middle between, that's where our title came from today, is caught in the crossfire. It's like, they're aiming at us again, but really it started off of, it's this war between tobacco control and big tobacco that we got stuck in the middle of.
Yeah, I've just seen Skip Murray's question.
Yeah, this is a question from a little while ago that I keep kind of hovering over because I really want. This is an excellent question, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Oh well, I think it's. I mean, it's a question and a statement, but it is true. I think, and if you look at what's really, what gets the juices flowing with these guys, and look at Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, fighting the hardest fights for 25 years or something, I think is their new slogan. It's all about martial rhetoric. It's all about bellicosity. It's all about these guys being heroes, fighting off a predatory industry that's trying to hook your children into addiction and keep them as that's their mindset, and that's what they do. And the fact that the world is rather different to that now, and that the tobacco companies have, to varying degrees, an approach that wants to get out of combustible products and into the nicotine market and beyond nicotine market. That's more or less the strategy of the two largest companies, PMI and BAT, and to some extent Altria. Then they're not adapting to that. They're just carrying on as if that hasn't happened. And they're trying to reshape their assumptions about the world, their interpretation of science, in some cases actual science, to shore up the case for a continuing and permanent war with the suppliers in that market. And I think they're making a mistake in doing that. I think we could move an awful lot faster if, I mean, this is going to sound bizarre, but if we followed the advice that Philip Morris International gives, rather than the advice that Campaign Tobacco-Free Kids gives, we would end the smoking-related disease epidemic much faster.
What a world to live in.
What a time to be alive.
The advice of tobacco companies outweighs,
listen, I'm starting to think, that some of the behaviors that we see in the tobacco control community are worse than the tobacco companies ever were, and more damaging, and actually even less ethical. And the reason is, I think the tobacco companies were absolute bastards. There's no doubt about it. They lied, they cheated, they bought science, they did the worst things. Okay, but most of that ended at the turn of the millennium, after the Master Settlement Agreement, after they were kicked to hell in court, after their executives were humiliated. I think they realized that could not go on, and they would just assume greater and greater liability, the more and more lies that they would take, and it would ultimately be wiped out in court if they carried on. And they more or less stopped and more or less started telling the truth. I mean, no worse than any other company anyway. Tobacco control people now, and I think what they did was bad, because they were merchants of doubt. They were in people who wanted to carry on smoking, wanted a reason to carry on smoking. They were providing those reasons. They were providing the doubts that said, hey, there's no point here. Oh, look, here's a light and mild cigarette. That'll keep you safe. Oh, look, here's a filter. And we don't really know where the cancer's coming from. It's something to do with asbestos, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, completely despicable. And I spent my earlier time at ASH fighting some of that stuff. But I believe more or less that has gone now. Tobacco control people now are telling sometimes lies, sometimes misunderstandings, sometimes groupthink about much safer alternatives, but beyond any reasonable doubt, much safer alternatives. They are implying that there is equivalence in risk between vaping and smoking, which I can only call a big lie. It's something American audiences will be familiar with. This is a really big lie. They have maxed out EVALI. Traces of EVALI propaganda are still present in the websites of American Heart, American Lung, American Cancer, CDC. You've still not seen them lay that demon to rest, even though beyond any shadow of imagination, there is no link between EVALI and nicotine vapes. Absolutely not. It's not even a doubt about that. There cannot be a link. Okay, yet that is still there in the propaganda. Now, what's that doing? And you look at the risk perceptions. It's now a majority of Americans think that vaping is as dangerous or more dangerous than smoking. What? You know, I mean, if you've created that, you are the worst merchants of doubt of all time. And the reasons I think they're worse than the tobacco companies is because nobody ever trusted the tobacco companies. We always knew they were dodgy. We always knew they were a bunch of crooks. These people come with an endowment of trust and respect because they are the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, the Center for Disease Control, even the Food and Drug Administration. They are pillars of the American health establishment, and they are lucky that they are respected and venerated as those institutions, and yet they are abusing the reservoir of trust on which they depend to create misinformation, which actually harms living Americans who that harm could be prevented and they could be diverted away. Instead, they are creating the doubt that keeps them as smokers. And that is utterly despicable. And the fact that there's some, billionaire kind of chancer who's pouring money into all of this based on ignorance of what he's doing and indifference to the consequences just makes it worse. And all of these organizations have been polluted with money from that despicable, disreputable source, which totally unaccountable, has no processes of internal government, refused to meet high-level academics who wanted to talk to them about it, just slam the door, and is just piling money into misinformation. It's shocking and it's despicable, and it's worse than the tobacco companies ever were. End of rant. I need to stop.
We were originally going to call this show The Fog of War, and you pretty much that's
oh my God.
Because it's kind of what it is with the misinformation and propaganda,
Well, I feel very strongly about this. I'm often, I often get a sort of little kind of pushback from public health people. So, Clive, don't be so ridiculous. No one's as bad as the tobacco companies. I don't believe that's true. I think if you objectively look at the way these clowns have abused their endowment of public trust, it's absolutely despicable. If you look at the results and nobody ever thought smoking was safe, really.
Right.
No one ever thought smoking was safe. But now they think that vaping is as dangerous as smoking. A majority of Americans think that. Oh my God, how did you achieve that?
Terrible.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff the drug companies have done, but they get a pass so often. I mean, there's only a fringe, like the mass majority of Americans still vilify big tobacco and everything. Yeah. But drug companies, I mean, stuff comes out all the time about stuff that they're doing. And it's like, it seems like if you have a problem with it, it's like, oh, slap on the hand and let's go back on to business, And big tobacco is the worst because they're selling cigarettes that people want.
I mean, big. I mean, the best way to think. I mean, people hate big tobacco, and they've done a huge amount to earn the hatred. But the best way of thinking of big tobacco are, first of all, they're inevitable. Okay, if you have, and every government does this, even Bhutan now does this. If you have a legal market for tobacco, if you regulate it and tax it and you allow it to be sold, there will be a tobacco industry. Yeah. There just has to be. Someone has to supply that market. So they are inevitable, and they do compete to sell as much stuff as they can. That's what they do. They're on earth to sell, compete, win market share, make profits for their shareholders. Get over that. That's what they do. Now, you want to take a realist approach to this. Stop doing your little warrior dances about how bad these guys are and start to think about what their incentives are and how you could change those incentives. So you have a number of things that will change the market. Okay, and I'm going to blog on this fairly soon, but a number of things that will change the market in a way that will end the cigarettes, not the sort of ridiculous bans or VLNC things that the tobacco control people love. But what you do is you change the information environment. Okay, so what people are saying, what they're communicating about the alternatives and the risks. Secondly, you change the regulatory environment to be risk proportionate. Okay, so that you're tough on the cigarettes and you're kind of much more liberal, focused on consumer benefits with regulation of the vaping and non-combustible tobacco products. You change the fiscal environment to create an economic incentive to switch. You take care of the competitive environment because you don't want to create oligopolies that will basically pursue industry interests rather than consumer interests. That's, a classic understanding of trust busting, is that you don't want oligopolies. And what's FDA doing? It's creating, it's got an oligopoly in the cigarette sector, so it wants to create one in the vaping sector. Okay, you think about the excuse me, the environment for innovation. You want the new products to come out to meet consumer needs. You want people to think about, well, how do I solve the problem of these people who say they don't like vaping because X, or they find it difficult to switch to vaping because of Y, or how do you get them to compete to produce more interesting products that will hold people and stop them relapsing, or get them to go from dual use to exclusive use? What do you do to give them more reassurance about safety, that these things are not going to burn out, they're not going to get dry hits and all that sort of thing? You want an innovation system. Now, again, FDA makes innovation incredibly difficult because of the lead time and the cost of bringing a new product to market through a PMTA or a substantial equivalence. Or you can't even do that for vaping, but a new PMTA every time you do a slight tweak to the product. Nobody's going to do that. The innovation is going to be happening outside. And then finally, what's going on with the consumer? What do consumers really want? And what's the consumer ecosystem doing? The consumer ecosystem for traditional smoking cessation medication and NRT is non-existent. The consumer ecosystem for I include kind of vape shops in this in some ways. I mean, it's not quite the same, but that's a very powerful driving force. Okay, take care that you don't destroy that in some sort of careless way. So if you get those kind of 6 environments right, and you get them all sort of humming together in concert with a view to getting rid of the cigarettes, I don't mean get rid of them in the sense of ban them. I mean drive them out in this. And again, the example I would use is, we've had an organic migration through innovation in music. Start off with vinyl, go to digital CD, then because you've got digital, you get an innovation in chip density. You can get to music players, the kind of iPod, and you can have music in your phone. Then you get a bandwidth enhancement, and you can have streaming. Okay. No one has ever stopped you buying a vinyl record, and there are still some people who like vinyl records. Good on them. But the market as a whole has moved into these new technologies as the underlying technologies, digitization, chip density, and bandwidth, have enabled music production, music delivery to shift onto now a kind of streaming platforms. Now, what we're going to see, I think, is something similar with vaping. Or with the non-combustible alternatives. You'll see, we've already seen the innovation. The keystone innovation is battery density, because it allows you to heat enough liquid for enough of the day quickly enough to create an inhalable aerosol that doesn't run out, and the battery doesn't run out in 2 minutes. That's the key. And then you get a further set of innovations to do with protonation and the use of acids and the creation of nicotine salts. You get, and you guys know much more about this than me, but you get things like temperature control. You get much more user feedback in the market. You get a greater diversity of flavors building over time. And these innovations over time drag the market away from the sort of tired value proposition of smoking into these new value propositions built out of these different environments. And that's how I think the change will happen over time.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, vaping is such a, just a consumer built product from the ground up. It was consumers that drove innovation. It was reviewers that drove innovation. Reviewers working with companies in China. It was small manufacturers designing and literally machining their own products that they wanted to use, that they wanted to see, that really got us, from the 2009 Cigalikes to the devices that we have today. And it really is truly an astonishing thing for folks who have been around since 2009 to watch this innovation happen. Like Kristen, I didn't start vaping until 2017. I tried my first e-cigarette in 2011, and it wasn't for me at the time. But it really is, it's just an astonishing thing to kind of go back and look at what really drove innovation, and it was consumers the entire way. Your average reviewer that was putting information out there, giving feedback to companies or working with manufacturers, whatever, they're also consumers. Reviewers are consumers, and that it really is astonishing, like how quickly and how much just your end user drove this industry in such a short span.
Sorry, Alex, go on.
I think Phil Basardo actually has a really good story about that, where he was reviewing an Inikin product, I think, and he had posted the review and noted some things that he would change. And I don't know how long it took. I mean, it was maybe a matter of a week or something like that. And Inikin sent him the product back with the changes that he had mentioned on his site. So it really was that short of a feedback loop.
And he said, just get a PMTA. It'll only take 250,000 pages and 2 years. but that's how the innovation model works. Essentially, and this is why the FDA's, it's not really had enough discussion this, but the FDA's approach is totally anti-innovation, because the way innovation has been working in this market has been a try it and see thing. You make a change to the product, you pick up a tip from a reviewer, and if it takes off, boom, it's a successful innovation. If it doesn't, you stop making it and do something else. And that's a sort of almost like a natural selection, evolutionary style of innovation, which is how it should work. And I agree with you, Logan. I mean, one day I think innovation scholars will look back on the period between sort of 2010 and 2022 and go, oh my God, what an amazing rate of progress happened in that market over that period. And I think, I would say now that all the studies that were done in 2013, forget them. They were almost dealing with completely different products than those on the market. And you still have this sort of thing that, well, e-cigarettes, we found, that's, let's cite Dutra and Glance from 2013 or wherever it was, or 2013 device. That's like an ancient history now. And it was a rubbish study when it was done.
Sure, it's a rubbish study
done on obsolete products.
Think about yourself. Think about your cell phone in 2002. I mean, in 2001, I had a flip cell phone. I had a separate Palm Pilot. I was still using a calendar. I had a paper book thing that, organizer. I mean, imagine if the FDA had taken over cell phones in 2003. Where we would be today. We'd still have pay phones and home
rotary dial.
We'd all be wearing helmets to protect us from the radiation.
The point you made about natural selection, though, is really, I've never really thought about that way, but it's true. I mean, and through a lot of people will talk about kind of the heydays of vaping, the golden era, 2014 to like 2016, that kind of era where we just had this swell of products. I mean, companies were putting out a new tank or a device seemingly like every 2 to 3 months. And you have all these companies. I mean, it was for a lot of people overwhelming. Even when I first started vaping in 2017, getting online and looking at products, I was like, oh my God, there's so much. But every little product did something a little bit different. And all the best qualities through the swell of those products, they slowly became standards. Better airflow, better this, but tanks stopped leaking and things like that. This device did this a little better, and there's still such a wide range of things for people to use. But some of those earlier things and some of the stuff that has come out along the way that just didn't make it didn't stick. Survival of the best. those products didn't stick around, and we've kind of abandoned some of those things. But
I
you're right.
remember
Natural
pining for
selection
it.
is the greatest way to think about that. And I guess I've kind of always thought about it that way, but I never put it quite into that perspective.
Well, if
And
anyone's interested in this, I
100%
would really recommend Matt Ridley's books on innovation. And Matt Ridley is he's a very thoughtful. He's actually a Lord Ridley. He sits in the House of Lords in Britain, but he's very keen on vaping. He's very pro vaping, and he's understood the innovation story here. But he writes brilliantly on innovation as a form of evolution and natural selection. His books are absolutely brilliant. But let me just say another thing about innovation, though, because there's a double-edged sword here. Because the innovation that you're talking about and the innovation that we like is innovation that produces benefits to consumers. Okay, there's another type of innovation that we've got to be careful of, which is innovation that is driven by regulation that is designed to make the products less appealing or more difficult to use. So one of the things that concerns me is this idea, for example, that you should have like Bluetooth enabled locks on products that would that would prevent anybody under the age of 18 ever using one of these things, because it would be linked to an app on the smartphone and blah blah blah. And
you can just smoke a cigarette. Oh, that's just
exactly. So a couple of companies have flirted with this because they think it would ingratiate them with FBA and everything, so they'd be able to say, look, no one can use our product. No one under 18 can use our product. Basically, no one would be able to use your product because you've made it too complicated. But of course, what would happen is that with those things, the problem users, the young people, just use something else. But the danger is it would become a de facto standard, and then you've created a barrier to consumer uptake, which for many people would be insurmountable, because they'd need a smartphone, they'd have to install an app, they'd have to have some sort of ID, they'd have to make a Bluetooth connection, blah, 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 all of which would be far beyond, a large number of possible users of these products. So I always think there is good regulation and bad regulation. Good regulation generally creates benefits for consumers. It means that the product is as described. It means that it doesn't have things in it that are, cancer causing, mutagenic, teratonic, whatever. It basically is as safe as it can be. It doesn't have ridiculous contaminants. It doesn't electrocute you. It doesn't burn you. It doesn't fall apart in your hands. That's all good, because that's all good for the consumer. Right. Then there's another type of regulation which is becoming dominant, actually, which is designed not in the interests of the consumer, but designed to make the products less appealing to consumers, and therefore designed to deter use. And in theory, it's designed to meet the interests of non-users to the extent that they have an interest in not using these products. And that is the flavor bans, the nicotine limits, the things like the postal bans, and all these other things that are designed to ultimately make it harder to use the product. And I think it's good conceptually to make a distinction between those, because there's you don't want to be a complete libertarian on this, because there's a lot of regulation that's potentially good for users of these products. It's still astonishing to me that we can have battery fires, for example. It's like, that is a classic problem for a regulator to sort out, that you shouldn't have these things blowing up in people's pockets because they're running. That is not an insurmountable design problem.
They're not usually blowing up in people's pockets, so it's usually batteries that people have left with change in their pockets. Almost all of them. There's been a couple, but if you think about it, not any worse than they haven't been able to solve the problem with laptops and cell phones blowing up either. So,
but that laptop, those issues are the kind of things regulators could get to work on.
Right.
They could get to work on, common power supplies. They could standardize some of the kind of electrical side of this sort of stuff, and actually that would be beneficial to consumers. Right. Quite what they would do, I don't know. All I know is that they haven't done it. And therefore, what we're seeing is a focus on the wrong type of regulation designed to deter use, and a kind of indifference to the right type of regulation that would provide benefits to consumers.
Right, and that poor regulation just makes smoking that much easier. You know, the harder that we make vaping, like you're competing with a product where you have to peel off some cellophane, tear out some tinfoil, pull one out and light it on fire. Like that is as complicated and as difficult as smoking a cigarette will ever be.
Yeah.
And like that's the ease that they're competing with. So the harder, the more less appealing we make vapor products or any smoke-free products, the harder it is for people to get, the harder it is for people to use, the less appealing it is. All of those things just make smoking that much more readily available, easier, sexier, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, the way I sort of see this, you know, from sort of like a marketing point of view, you have two rival value propositions. There's a value proposition associated with smoking, which is its price, where you can use it, its convenience, how easy it is to buy it, how good the nicotine delivery is, what it tastes like, what the aesthetics are like. All of these things go together to create an experience. Rival value proposition from vaping is the same sort of things. Is it easy to use? Do you like it? Does it taste good? Does it provide a satisfactory nicotine experience? What about the sensory side of it? What about the aesthetics? What about the convenience of using it? How easy is it to buy it? All of those things combine together to create a rival value proposition. And what we've tried to do in public health is degrade the value proposition of smoking by, you know, banning advertising, raising taxes, limiting where it can be sold. In some countries, plain packaging, removing flavors, blah, blah, blah. There's been an effort to try to degrade the smoking value proposition. Unfortunately, that mindset has now shifted into the vaping side of the value proposition, and they're busy trying to degrade that now, when actually the strongest thing you could do would be to strengthen the value proposition to consumers and draw people from a degraded smoking value proposition to an enhanced vaping value proposition. I mean, I know a lot of people don't agree with me. You should just leave smokers alone to get on with it. But that's the way the public health approach has been on smoking, and I can't see that changing. Whereas I can see there's much more to play for in whether you enhance or degrade the value proposition for vaping and other combustibles, non-combustibles.
Yeah, I did kind of want to jump in and maybe wrap things up. We've kept you a little long, but I certainly don't want to be the cooler here and shut this down, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know our audience has as well. But I did want to maybe try to end on my favorite thing to do, which is make a statement in the form of a question. And that being, you know, with everything that we've talked about misperceptions of risk and misperceptions of nicotine, and then misperceptions of addiction. And one of the things that really struck me before I got involved in all of this stuff, I went through substance use treatment in early mid 2000s, and going through that experience and coming out on the other side and listening to people joke about a chocolate addiction and all of the sort of cutesy things that people say, oh, I'm addicted to the streaming Netflix or whatever. To me, that has always struck this chord of sort of diluting the conversation overall about substance use. And so sort of expanding on that a little bit and looking at, you know, people talking about how, as we were discussing earlier, you know, this whole idea of like not even once, like if you pick up a cigarette or a vape or whatever, you're instantly addicted for life. That is also, I think, I believe, creating hurdles to the larger conversation about all drugs. And this is I sort of offer my own disclaimer and full disclosure here. This is not a veiled attempt to get drug policy people involved in this fight. It is a direct appeal, if you will, that and I'm asking you ultimately, you know, do you think that this very skewed and propaganda based conversation that we're having about nicotine is devaluing or diluting the broader conversation about taxing and regulating or legalizing. I hate to use legalizing, but creating a regulated marketplace for all drugs.
Well, that's an excellent and massive final question. Statement. Thank you.
So the big one.
Yes.
Another hour. Yeah, I agree with all of that. Okay, see ya. Look, the language of addiction is really unhelpful, I believe. And one of the interesting things that I've been sort of probing colleagues on is what actually do you mean by addiction? And it's quite interesting. There's a thing called it's called the addiction ontology. Okay, and it's a set of standard definitions that are supposed to be used in science, and it's initiated by the journal Addiction, I think. And it's to try to say, well, when we use these terms scientifically, we should use them in a way that's consistent, in a way we all agree with. Okay. And the definition of addiction has two elements. It's sort of like a sort of compulsive use, but that persists through serious net harm to the individual. In other words, if there isn't a lot of harm involved, then it isn't an addiction, it's a dependence, and it's something different. And they actually say in this, they actually elaborate on that and say, we focus on the harm because we want to separate off issues that really require a public health intervention. Okay, and this is back to the distinction between coffee and smoking. It's like, it's probably, there's a lot of people who are quite dependent on coffee and feel a bit weird if they don't have their morning caffeine. I'm one. But it's not something we lose our minds over because there's not a lot of collateral damage associated with it. Whereas smoking, there is, and there was a large effort to try to control the massive burden of disease that ultimately emerged from smoking. But nicotine doesn't fall into that category. And it may be there's some risks associated with vaping, but they're going to be much smaller, inevitably, than smoking risk. So is that really an addiction if it doesn't have this collateral damage associated with it? And if it's not an addiction, how should we treat it in society? Should we treat it the same way that we treat coffee and go, well, we don't go, well, the problem is you're now a slave to Starbucks, and you're now in the grip of big coffee. We don't do that.
Lifetime caffeine addict. Lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, you could make you hear arguments made about nicotine. Well, they've got them as customers, so people are basically being, they're being wrung out for money here because they're captivated on this. But that's true of a lot of things that people like. They just kind of carry on doing it because they feel intensively that they like it. They get a buzz from it. That's where you get back to the chocolate addiction and coffee addiction and those sort of things. So I think a much more nuanced approach to what nicotine use is, out with smoking. Forget the smoking side of it. What does it mean to be a nicotine user? What are the rewards from it? Who benefits from it? Are those benefits real, or, as many in tobacco control would say, are they imaginary? Are they an illusion caused by withdrawal? And what are the costs? What's the downside of being a nicotine user? To what extent is it? Have you lost your autonomy? Can you ever stop? What if you're a woman and you're pregnant and you want to stop completely? How hard is that? So I would like to see, and I'm not really well equipped to have this debate because I've not ever used the product, but what are the costs and benefits of being an actual nicotine user other than a smoker, other than a combustible user? What are the ups and downs of it? And then maybe we could have a more mature debate about nicotine as a pattern of substance or stimulant use that could take its place alongside other legal stimulants like caffeine, like alcohol, increasingly like cannabis, and And maybe we could just say, well, let's get to a market for that, recognize that people like it, they're not especially harmed by it, and that includes adolescents, doesn't affect their brains, whatever anyone says, and just get to a rational marketplace for this that is relatively low risk, not necessarily zero risk, because nothing is, within the normal risk appetites of society. And that's the long term that we're aiming for. And a lot of innovation brought in over the next 10 years, plus the right approach to those 6 environmental things, information, tax, regulation, and so on. And we could get there quite quickly in the United States and worldwide.
Well done. I think
Is that the answer? Is that right or wrong, by the way?
I think
it has to be close enough
stellar.
for now. It's better than what we've got for sure.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that pretty much covered our last question too. We were asking what U.S. should do to stop all this, and you kind of basically answered that
all
question.
the things that you've said. This
Exactly. You actually answered
What's
that
wrong
question.
with the FDA?
I'll give you a very quick. I know. I'm going to give you a very quick one. The important thing is the change of mindset. It's to see this as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Right.
Everything else is possible once that changes, because then you get CDC behaving much more like Public Health England, and FDA uses its flexibilities, and it has a lot of flexibility to make the path to market for these products much more straightforward. It can use standards. It can stop some of the incredible repetition in the PMTA process. It can make findings. It can leave some of the stuff that are required pre-market. It can shift that to post-market during surveillance. It could have a de minimis kind of approach to small businesses. There are all kinds of things that it could do if it wanted to do them. It just doesn't want to do them at the moment. And that's the thing that has to change, is the mindset. And that's a matter of about probably half a dozen thought leaders in the United States changing their mind or having their minds changed. And I'm really referring to like the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the Bloomberg complex, the respectable body part organizations, and all that lot. And then anything's possible.
I was going to say you're kind of preaching to the powerless choir here, because we don't have any power to do any of that.
Not powerless. Not powerless.
How do we change? How do we change them? You know,
because reality will leave them marooned on a sandbank of idiocy eventually. Reality will just flow right past them. These products are essentially a diffusion of innovation that will displace cigarettes, and they'll be somehow fighting they'll be fighting modernity. They'll be fighting progress, and that will fairly soon become evident, and they'll look ridiculous. And most of them are smart enough not to let it get to the point of being ridiculous. To keep nurturing and working with the voices in public health, which are massively underpowered, by the way, in terms of volume, but there are a lot of them. Look at that SRNT 15 President's paper. Okay, that's where the grown-ups are in public health. That's where the serious people are. Now, they're not serious in the sense of making a noise louder than a war, which is what the clowns in public health and their activists and the Bloomberg complex are doing. But that's where the serious thought leaders are. And there's more of them every day.
That's a positive note to end on.
Yeah.
It's more positive. It's more positive than it looks.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. Thank you. Just thank you across the board for taking the time tonight to come on and rant. I wish we just had an infinite abundance of time, to let you just carry on, because
we have to have you back.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever nodded my head yes so much in 2 hours before. Just
all right. Well, I think the danger is if we do it again, I might have a stroke. So I need to. Yeah, calm down a bit, but I'd love to do it again. It's great talking to you guys, and I really respect everything that CASAA has done, and the incredible fight that you're taking to these kind of naysayers and progress deniers. I mean, I see the alerts. Not much I can do about them, but I see the alert that state by state, legislature by legislature, battle by battle. That's amazing. If you're listening and you're not a member, get your pocketbook out, sign up, press the button. Come on, Do it. These are the right people. Okay. And good luck with the fight.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you,
Thank you
Clive.
so much.
All right.
And
Yeah,
thank you for
absolutely.
all of your work.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're an inspiration.
We're definitely going to get you back,
You're
but we're
the
going to make sure you
inspiration.
don't have a stroke doing it.
Okay. You're the inspiration. All right, folks. See you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Clive Bates, everybody.
Whew.
Yeah,
got goosebumps.
fantastic.
I
My
got
gosh. Oh, and for everybody wondering, you don't have to break out your pocketbooks to sign up for CASAA. It is absolutely free to become a member.
Yes.
All right. Well, wow. Okay. We're already 2 hours and 8 minutes deep into this. So we're going to hit the bumper and I'm going to give the floor to Alex for some legislation. Do we have it? Yeah, we do. Let's do the thing.
We got some.
I gotta calm down. He's got my heart rate up. Jeez.
Did that play?
Yeah, it did.
Oh, it did. Okay,
Yeah,
I didn't even. It just froze my whole screen for 5 seconds, and then everybody came back. So I don't know. I hope everybody got the loud bumper.
They did.
It was sufficient. Yes, indeed.
Sufficiently loud.
All right,
So,
Alex, the floor is yours, sir. What do we need to keep our eyes and ears on this week?
Everybody ready for the state-by-state march of horrible legislation that we're all dealing with every single year. So I'll start with the potentially, the middle of the road news first. In Colorado, I think I need to update this with the hearing or the meeting information. Just found out about this last night, that HB 1064 is still on the move. The Colorado legislature has fewer than 7 days left now. When I updated this, it was 7 days, so it's probably 5 or 6 at this point. Meaning that there's going to be some pressure to move this thing, and it is going into the Senate. It has a meeting in the Senate Finance Committee on Monday. We'll update this, but for those of you in Colorado, the targets are set to contact your senators and urge them to oppose this bill. Again, this is the lightning round. So even though it's got a couple of committee hearings, it could end up in some sort of monster session where they just stop the clock at midnight and keep going into the next day, even though session officially ends. That happens kind of frequently. The good news about this bill is apparently, at least within the executive branch in Colorado, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of enthusiasm about this. I'm not going to put a whole lot of weight on that yet, because it still has to go through the Senate. Things can get amended. Things could get changed to become more appealing to the governor. We don't know. All of that to say, if you're in Colorado and you haven't yet, even if you have, reach out and touch your senator and let them know that banning vaping and flavors is a bad idea. And you can do that, of course, on our call to action page. Getting back to moving along swiftly here. Let's see. Alaska, still SB 45 is active. The similar situation to Colorado. Session ends on the 18th, so a couple weeks here, and Alaska's done for the year. So if you haven't taken advantage of this yet, go ahead and send your messages. I know we've had some kind of weak participation in Alaska, although not a lot of population density there either. So please send your messages in. All of these meetings have obviously already happened. I don't have any more meetings scheduled at the moment. So please take advantage of the engagement we have up and get in touch with your lawmakers and urge them to oppose this. This is a tax. It has been changed to a 45% wholesale tax on everything. And the flavor ban has been removed, which in cases like what we see in Hawaii, this may result in all of the antis or the people who support this horrible legislation withdrawing that support. So we don't know yet, but that's kind of where it is. The next one is going to be Hawaii, as I mentioned. I think, did I mention Hawaii? Whatever, we're back to Hawaii.
Man, I feel like we never talk about Hawaii.
Oh, geez.
And we've been talking about Hawaii a lot. Hawaii always has like half a dozen or more
happening in Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii always has like a half a dozen or more bills that are introduced, and we go through this kind of shuffle. So this did pass the conference committee this past week, and again, did I'm getting all of these mixed up in my head. Okay, I just didn't write PMTA in here. So HB 1570 was amended with an exemption for flavors or for products given a marketing granted order through FDA. And again, this is another one of the situations where it's possible to see the antis withdraw their support because of that exemption. Excuse me. I don't think I need to point out sort of the hypocrisy and irony of that.
But God bless him for it.
Yeah, I would just stop doing what you're doing. It would be great for all of us. But of course, these are the same groups that advocated for the Tobacco Control Act, helped craft the language, negotiate it with Philip Morris, and have held FDA regulation up as this gold standard. And now, of course, they are going back on their support of that regulation. And so anything that includes a PMTA exemption tends to lose their support over time. So I don't have an over-under on this bill passing, getting signed, all of those things. But we have updated this for folks to send a veto message to the governor of Hawaii, urge them to veto the bill, and we'll kind of see. I'm still waiting for more details, of course, on sentiment in the executive branch. So we'll see how that plays out.
Isn't
But
he
if you're in
kind of
Hawaii,
anti-vaping? I thought he was anti-tobacco, anti-vaping. So
I'm not sure. I don't know
might
which
be
way he
different.
dresses on this issue. So we'll see. The final one, I've saved the best for last because good news is a great way to end an episode. And we're going to go to the
Wait, before you do that then, with good news, you're not doing Washington, are you?
Was there something for Washington?
Somebody asked about it in chat.
Washington State? Oh, no, that's Washington County, Oregon.
Yeah.
Why it's Oregon. Someone was making a joke about how many Vancouvers there are. Jim Gaffigan was making a joke about how many Vancouvers there are. So, of course, Washington County and Washington State, people are going to get mixed up. No, this is a ballot initiative it's a referendum in Washington, Oregon. And for those who are asking or interested, just to be clear, a yes vote on the referendum is what's needed to overturn the county ordinance banning flavors. So I'm just going to stick with the yes vote. If you are in Washington County, Oregon, take advantage of the ballot, the election coming up. I forget the date. It is this month. Is it middle or end of the month? I want to say like May 17th. I'm not exactly sure. It's statewide elections, but this referendum is on the ballot in Washington County. Yes vote overturns the flavor ban. It's not something we can't put up a call to action and get people to send emails and make phone calls to support the referendum. So it's really going to be a lot of, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, and explain to them why that ordinance needs to be overturned. We're not a tobacco company, so we don't have millions of dollars to throw into a campaign. So this is pretty much it. So anyway, that is the answer for Washington County, Oregon. And now can I end on the good news?
That's why I wanted to get that in there so you could end on
Give
the
us
good
all
news.
the good news,
Perfect.
man.
Perfect. The good news is that in the Granite State, is that Connecticut? Or is that New Hampshire? No, New Hampshire's live free or die. I'm pretty sure Connecticut's the Granite State. Whatever. The great state of Connecticut managed to allow the flavor ban to die on the vine. So I have yet to update this, but I did have an article. So we'll get the visual aids going here. As soon as I can, it doesn't matter. There's an article out there and it'll be linked in the description. For now, we're just showing the Connecticut call to action page, which doesn't really offer you any new information here. But the flavor ban in Connecticut is dead for the year. And of course, the supporters of all of this horrible regulation have vowed to bring it back next year. So if you're in Connecticut, really, if you're anyone living in New England, you can pretty much expect these policies to come up year after year after year. They are relentless in their in their zealotry and ideology. And so good news for now, Connecticut is not facing a statewide flavor ban. Special thanks, of course, to everybody who did any amount of work in opposing this. Special thanks to all of our people who participated in this call to action, the boots on the ground, the folks that we talk to pretty much on an annual basis about this dumb policy, for helping to at least, run out the clock on this bill. So good job, Connecticut. Way to go. Thank you for your tireless efforts. And
I threw the link in the chat. We'll add it to the description afterwards.
Fantastic. So with that, I'm done with the legislative rundown.
Woo!
Now everybody go out and enjoy your Saturday.
Yeah, that is definitely where we're gonna wrap this this episode up. Yeah, one last huge round of applause and shout out to Clive Bates for just being a fantastic human being and understanding the complexities and nuances of all of this and having the compassion to look past the propaganda and see people as human beings and respect them and give them the dignity that they deserve in all of this. Clive's he's just a hell of a human being. Just a hell of a human being. Anyway.
And he doesn't smoke or vape, so hey.
Yeah. My neck is actually sore from how much I was just nodding. It's just like, oh my gosh, now I need a neck massage and everything. But yeah, huge shout out to Clive. Thank you to everybody in chat today. Thank you for the excellent comments and questions. Thank you guys for sticking around for legislation. The 30 of you or so who are still here hanging out for legislation. Thank you guys. Thank you to all of you. For anyone here who's not currently a CASAA member, you've done almost everything correctly except for that. You need to head over to CASAA.org and sign up today. It's absolutely free. You don't have to break out your pocketbook for it. But as Danielle stated, we do have a fancy schmancy donate button just in case you want to break out that pocketbook. You absolutely can. Another great way to help us out and also to just be a glorious walking billboard for tobacco harm reduction is to check out our merchandise shop. Check out all the great designs that Danielle worked real hard on. Get yourself some swag. For podcast listeners, say you made it through this whole spiel. Now you're about to find out that there's going to be 2 versions of this available. You can check it out, the full version with Clive, or you can check out just the shorthand version that I edit down with basically just Alex's rundown of legislation in case you got those quick commutes to work. Those are available. Maybe you've been watching the replay and you fast forward to the end because all you care about is legislation. You don't even have to do that. You can just put in your earbuds or hit play on your phone or whatever. Head over to SoundCloud and we did break 200 followers on SoundCloud. So to anybody out there right now who's not currently following us on SoundCloud, head over to soundcloud.com, look up CASAA Media, click that follow button. I would love to see some more follows over there, or really anywhere, all the platforms that our podcast goes out to. Danielle said swag. Yes. Yes, absolutely. All this amazing swag here. Yes, weapons of mass disruption.
We now officially need a design for what was it? The Tower of Dumb.
The tsunami of, was it the tsunami of something?
Tsunami of
all the things of dumbness. The Tower of Dumbness.
Yeah,
the Empire State Building of Dumbness.
You got so many. They were.
Yeah. Danielle's really selling it. She's like, you want to wear these. You know you do. You know how good you're gonna look in these t-shirts? Stellar. Anyways, other than that, as far as I know, we're all going to be back here next week. I don't think we have anything going on. We should be here same time, same place.
Did you mention the Twitter Spaces this coming week?
We do have a Twitter Space this coming Wednesday. Kristen, who is with us on this Twitter Space? Anyone?
I don't know about the Twitter Space.
No, I can fill you in on the details.
Alex is up, but I'll fill in.
Alex knows much more than I do. You guys, yeah. I've been way out of the loop this week.
Just to tee
bullshit tsunami. That's what it was. Thank you, Skip.
just to tee this up with no spoilers, we don't have a special guest. We are the special guests. This is going to be a sort of a board panel discussion.
That's this week. Okay, yes.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about. I'm just going to take my own goofy title here: the intersection of bodily autonomy and bodily autonomy. So
I'm a big fan. I'm a big
you can
advocate.
make of that what you will. No spoilers, but it should be a lively discussion, and we will do it on Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, there's quite a discussion around bodily autonomy these days, particularly in the United States. So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. I know Danielle is excited to have this conversation. Danielle is also a very, very passionate bodily autonomy advocate. So yeah, this is going to be a great Twitter space. You guys follow us over on Twitter at CASAA Media. That is at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you're on the West Coast, that's like 4 or something. If you're over the West Coast, you guys don't matter. No, I'm just kidding. We love you.
Danielle says
West Coast and Best Coast. I just like to tease Danielle. That's all. That's all.
Danielle says if you want to hear me pop off, tune in. It will be a riot.
It'll be a riot. Yeah.
And the other thing that a lot of people are talking about these days is this menthol ban. Which next week on our show on CASAA Live, we will be having Guy Bentley, another great journalist who wrote this awesome article about the menthol issue. He's written a lot of great articles about vaping, so we will have him on next week.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you here who are also on Twitter, active on Twitter, are very familiar with Guy Bentley. So
is this like 4 things in a row where we've had someone with a British, Australian, and New Zealand
I don't know,
accent?
but I'm digging it.
We're getting all the foreign accents here. So yeah, looking forward to Guy Bentley. That'll be a good one to tune into as well.
Yes,
he's in New York though. I asked him because I thought he was in the UK still, but
yes, he's definitely English.
He's charmingly
British.
British.
Yeah. All right, I think that's it. I think that's all the things. Is that all the things?
We've done all the
groups
and the stuff.
Groups.
Yo, Facebook groups, you guys. If you live in a state, you have a Facebook group that you can join. If you don't live in a state, you can just still follow the main CASAA page. You can follow the pages, whatever you want to do, regardless. But yeah, absolutely. If you live in a state, you should absolutely join the Facebook state group. Get involved. We track a lot of legislation across the country, but there are small municipalities and small things that make their way through that we don't always catch, that a lot of people in our state groups do. And that's a huge benefit to everyone around. So please, it's a great way if you're looking for a way to be more involved in all of this outside of just being the amazing human being that you are. You can get into those Facebook groups and help us help everyone, because you guys remember, we are CASAA, not like Kristen and Alex and me and Jim, whatever. We cumulatively, all of us, we are CASAA, and it takes a village. So
from your mouth to God's ear.
You guys qualify as special. Thanks, Christy. Yeah, we are the special guests. So yeah. And yeah, like Skip said one last time, happy early Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And I guess that's where we're going to wrap it up.
That's it.
Okay.
Well, I just want to do one more thing because Tom loves us all.
Thanks,
Tom has my heart, you guys. I love Tom to death. Anyways, that's it. That's going to do it for us. We will be back here again. We'll be live on Twitter Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. And we'll be back here next Saturday, as always, 4:30 p.m. Not always. Sometimes we take a week off, but we will be back next week, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. That's it. We're out of here. Be excellent to each other, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next time.